Everyone. Um, this video is part 2 of our Totally Junk Journal, and this is the top load pocket. I started with just a junk mail envelope, and as you can see, I'm covering the surface of it with security envelope designs. The top edge has been cut open, just as if you had opened it to take your mail out of it. I use book page, dictionary page, the security envelopes, all as texture and color. I know that the black and white and the cream and white is not really color, but it gives you the difference in the pattern, the visual thing that happens. I use a glue stick, and I use an old magazine or a catalog or something to the right of your page to get the glue on the paper so that I get everything to the edge. As I said, this project is ongoing. We do our newest page or newest project, part of the project, in my live streams on Sundays at noon Central. And these videos, I'm trying to make a shortened version of each video so that those that are coming in new to the project can catch up. There I just used a credit card. Now, the envelope has been covered, and I'm just lifting off the edges. If you notice the rough edges around the roughness around the edges, I'm going to trim off. But I also cheated and I finished the other side first so that you wouldn't have to watch me do that forever and ever. Here I'm just trimming off the excess that's around the edges of the project. I also had a lot of technical difficulty last week. That's why I'm doing a narration today. It wasn't my plan, but for some reason I recorded 2 videos that had no sound. Sometimes technology is not my friend. Once we trim the edges all off, we're going to turn it back over, and I'm going to show you the next steps on the pocket. I've used a sheet of wax paper here to work on. For some unknown reason, my craft mat was causing a lot of glare last week, so the wax paper helps. There I've set it aside just to get out my images and color. I'm going to use the color from those balloons on that page. I just open a magazine, an old magazine, and choose something that has some color to add to my page in the background. And here I am just rough cutting out the colors. Next, I'm actually going to cut circles out of this color. If you had a punch, circle punch, you could certainly use that. As this project is designed for those that do not have a lot of tools or supplies, you just fold the paper, a square of paper, in half and then in half again, and cut out my circle. It's not always perfect. Sometimes I trim it up a little bit. Here I just laid a piece of white paper down so you could see what was going on, since my desk is so covered with paint and such. And I want several circles. I also want the circles to be different sizes. And here I just decided that having cut it on the fold, it wasn't quite right, so I trimmed it up a little bit. These circles will create a background for my images. Now the envelope and the pocket page is going to need to be folded in the center to fit into our signature. So truthfully, I'm working on 2 pages there that you see right now, not just one. See, here's where I fold it to give myself an idea of where my pages are actually coming to. And believe me, once you have covered an envelope with all of the other papers, it becomes quite sturdy. I decide I don't really like that circle so much, but I put it in the middle because it'll show half and half on each page. And I'm just kind of trying out my backgrounds and my color. Sometimes I cut my elements in half so that it expands the page. And for some reason that white piece on that circle just really, I just didn't like it for some reason. Now I'm putting my focal points on, and they're just a couple of images that I took out of an old magazine. As this project is called Totallyjunkjunkjournal, I try to use only supplies or only basic supplies that anyone should be able to have. Old magazines, some sort of photos, some sort of image. Of course, this is your project, so if you choose to invest in digital downloads or something like that, please go right ahead. That's just not the way I designed. I think about the project. I think about those who do not have all of the things that I actually have in my studio. And here I'm just going to glue down all the elements. My elements don't always end up exactly where I had placed them the first time, but they usually are fairly close when I've been working this way. It's a visual thing. Sometimes they change as I put them down on the page. Okay, I've glued on all of my little pieces. I'm trying to clean up the mess I made. And now I'm going to go around all of the images or my main focal points with a permanent black marker. That one happens to be a Faber-Castell pit pin, a brush marker. It's actually been used quite a bit, and the tip of it is kind of worn. I think it's time to replace it. since that particular image, that flower, had a flat side, I put it on so that the flat edge of it, the incomplete edge, was in the gutter or the fold of my pages. That allowed me to use that image on that particular spot, and no one will ever know, most likely, once I bind the pocket into the page, the book. And you notice I tend to turn my paper upside down when I get to a spot where it's more comfortable to work on it. I do that if I'm drawing something as well. Rotate my paper around. And there we go. The black marker just makes your images stand out or pop just a little bit. So now both sides are done to this point. They both have focal points, they both have background, and I now have a pocket. I've got it laid sideways for some reason, but oh, I know why. I'm getting ready to put little thumb spots. Make it a little easier to open the envelope. I just take out a little kind of half circle out of the page. Now, there again, you could do that with a circle punch by just inserting it halfway and punching out. But I just used my scissors. It wasn't the easiest thing to do. If I had thought ahead of time, I might have done a little V or triangle into it instead of trying to do the half circle, but that is one place a circle punch is very helpful. Okay, now that we've got that part done, we are going to sew around the edges. And you can go through with a awl or a punch tool and punch holes roughly 1/4 of an inch all the way around. But I happen to have found a great big sharp needle, which for some reason I didn't have one. And I am going to use the big sharp needle to just punch and sew at the same time. I'm going to use some cotton embroidery floss, some stuff out of my stash, stuff that I, have. But if you didn't have that, cotton crochet thread, anything that's kind of thick, gives you some, we're doing additional texture and interest around the edge of the envelope. It is not really to hold the envelope together in any way, shape, or form. It is just simply as a decoration. And here I pull off I pull apart that skein of thread, and all the pieces are sort of too small. It's kind of like, okay. I guess I decide that this piece is probably not long enough, so I put it aside too. And I don't know why I did all that, because in the end I have to tie it together anyways. So here I am getting out a different skein of thread that hopefully is whole. Now this thread is wasn't actually in my stash. My father-in-law has been getting rid of a lot of things, and apparently it was something that my mother-in-law had, and she's been gone a long time now, so it's pretty old. And I went around the envelope about 3 times, thinking that that would be enough thread for what I wanted to do, and it ended up not being, but I'll show you what I have to do when I run out. And that's embroidery floss, and there's 6 strands in embroidery floss, but I wanted the stitching to really show up, so I used the whole thing. Now I left a nice long tail because I'm going to add some charms to there later. And I don't try to tie a knot off or anything right now, because as I stitch back around it, the tail will give me something to tie to. And I've zoomed in here, which I'm very pleased with how that looks, so that you can kind of see what's going on. And I had constant trouble with it tying itself in knots. I don't know. As I said, last week was not the best of video weeks, and I'm just now getting this narrated and edited because of it. Takes a while to sew around this, and as I said, after you've layered all that paper on top of your envelope, it becomes pretty stiff, so getting your needle shoved through there each time is something you want to be careful not to stick yourself with, because it's going to go in pretty hard. And it just kept tangling up and tangling up. That will happen if you've got too long of a piece of thread. Also, you're sewing through paper. It's not the same as when you're sewing through fabric. And I'm just doing a whip stitch. A whip stitch is just where you wrap it around the edge and stitch up through the back side each time. I'm not worrying about perfection in the length or the width of my stitches. What I'm really doing is just making a little decoration on there. Now at the corners, I do go back through the same hole and add a little bit, because otherwise the corners sort of get empty. The stitches don't lay right over the top. So see, I went back around and then I started down the bottom, across the bottom. And I know this gets boring watching, but somewhere along the line I'm going to run out of thread. I also was having trouble with my sleeves. For some reason, they would not stay up out of my way. And I don't know, for those of you who don't make videos, trying to make sure that everything you do stays right on in the camera can sometimes be a little difficult. And here I have stitched all the way around one time, and I have no idea why this portion of the video is so different than the other. I did make it all the way across in this one with one piece of thread, and it could be left right there, but I sort of wanted to do a little cross stitch around the edges of it, and I chose another color of thread, and when you stitch through the same holes, you end up with sort of a cross stitch kind of thing. So in just a second, I'll start up and show you what I'm talking about. Yeah, I did. I did that wrong. You need to start on the same edge that you started on in the first place, and you go from the opposite direction. So instead of coming up from the back, you're going to start down from the top. And you see there, I've left my two tails sticking out there. Those are where I'm going to put my charms. And I had constant trouble with that silly thing catching on the edge there. And I'm also trying to keep my fingers out of your way so you can see. But if you notice, it's starting to look like I get little V's out of my stitches. Using two different colors of thread, I had hoped it would show up better for you. But it's just an added part of the decoration. And here's where I realize my thread is too short. I had thought it was long enough, and there it is. I'm about 2 inches too short. The thread's not going to make those last 2 inches. So I get out another piece. And I left myself a nice long tail, even though I'm going to cut it off there and just leave a little piece that's sticking out. I didn't want to fight trying to tie a knot with a little 1-inch piece. It is much easier to tie a knot and waste a couple inches of thread than to waste a half an hour trying to tie a knot with a tiny piece of thread. Now I hear that many people find embroidery thread at the thrift store, but it's also often on sale. So getting a couple of skeins, if you don't have any embroidery thread, it works nice for a lot of projects. And in a minute, I'll show you what I do to finish those off. And this is a totally junk journal, so I am trying to use up scraps and pieces of things. Now I'm just going to take those 2 ends and tie them in knots. And I went ahead and did this now because they kept getting tangled up in my other thread that I was trying to stitch with. Oh, that picture doesn't show it. I cut that off with about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch of tail. And don't throw those little pieces away. We might use them for something. Now I'm going to finish up my stitching on my pocket. Yay, that part's done. And I'm just going to tie these in knots, leaving them long because I want to add little charms to them. And I do that to both sides of the pocket. Okay, so now our pocket is done and we're going to do the charms. And I have a strip of basic color from a magazine. It's just a photograph, a piece of photograph, and I stuck it to a piece of envelope, security envelope paper, because I wanted the pieces to be just a little stiffer. And what I'm going to do is take those pieces of envelope paper and make two pieces each that match, and I'll show you what happens. But that by gluing those two pieces together, it just gave it a little bit more stiffness. And I'm just going to cut out a circle real quick here. And since I want my circles to match, I'm putting it on top of the other one. In a second, yeah, there we go. I realized that it would be easier for you to see what I was doing if I turned it over. And a lot of times I just do circles for the little charms, but today I'm going to make some different little pieces. I decided to cut a couple more circles, and I just cut them both at the same time this time. They don't need to all be the same size, but two pieces need to sort of match. Now I'm going to put glue, and I usually put glue on both sides, both little circles that I'm going to glue together, and lay the string between. It just gives it a little more stability if the thread has been glued on both sides. Then I realized I forgot to put my little knot in. I usually put my knot in just below the charm, because even if it's glued in there, the little paper charm can pull off of your thread. So it does help to have a little knot. And I had left myself such a tiny little piece of thread, that you should realize that you should do what I say and not what I do. I told you just a little while ago, don't cut your threads too short. But now I have a knot right below my charm. And this time I wised up and tied the knot first, like I should have done in the first place. And then I'll put the charm on just above the knot. Put the glue on the wrong side of my paper, so this charm's going to be a little different. I decided to fold it in half and make a half circle charm. And I've got another circle, so I decide I'll fold that one in half too. Then realized I didn't put my knot in. My fingers keep getting glue all over them. And I decide I want to make a charm out of some book paper. Now, I keep book pages where I have glued 2 pages together, and I do that, I just do it, and that way I have them. And so that book paper had been glued together twice. 2 pages had been, so it was a little stiffer. And this charm's going to be a little rectangular one. Now remember that if you're interested in this project, I live stream on Sundays at noontime Central, and we've been completing a different part of this project each Sunday. I try to let everyone know what's the next batch of supplies, and there's always a supply list down in the description box. We have a set of basic supplies, and then sometimes I add a little of this or a little of that to each week. I try to tell you ahead of time what to look for, what to save something of. I mean, I don't always keep every piece of junk mail, although I keep envelopes and certain things all the time. And this is my 1001 ways to creativity, and I will say that today's quote is, "The creative person is the one who understands." Well, I guess I won't tell you because it just disappeared. Sorry about that, guys. Have fun. Bye-bye.